There is a version of this story you already think you know. Tourist. Guard. Buckingham, actually. Palace. A laugh, maybe. A viral video. Someone's holiday reel soundtracked to something embarrassing. That's not this. What I'm going to tell you happened on a Tuesday in October, which matters because Tuesdays at the palace are quieter. Fewer buses, fewer cameras, fewer senior officers with their eyes peeled for the kind of incident that ends careers. The tourist in question was not malicious, not drunk, not performing for followers. She was just ordinary. Curious in the like, way that ordinary people are when no one's ever told them what ordinary can cost. And the guard, Lance Corporal Daniel Marsh, he hadn't slept more than 3 hours. His boots had a blister the size of a 50-pence piece chewing into his left heel. His ex-wife had texted at 0430, 2 words, no context. He was 26 years old and holding himself together with ceremony and stubbornness. The tourists never, see that part. They see the bare skin, kind of, the red tunic, the stone face. They see the performance of invincibility. They don't see the man inside it negotiating every single second with everything that wants to break him. She crossed the line at 11:43. What happened next? I've turned it over in my head 100 times. I've written it in my incident log 3 different ways, each one technically accurate, none of them true. This is the true one. I was logging foot traffic. Plus, that's what I do. That's what I've done for 11 months on outer perimeter detail. I count people. I categorize threat levels 1 through 5 on a form that was designed in 1987 and has never been updated. And I drink too much coffee from a flask that smells faintly of the boot polish I accidentally decanted into it in February. My name is Corporal Yusuf Adesanya, and I'm, by any honest measure, the least glamorous part of the Buckingham Palace visitor experience. I noticed her at 11:31. She was mid-40s, blue cagoule, the kind of tourist who takes photographs of everything, the road, the gates, the back of a stranger's head, because she doesn't quite trust her own memory. She had a tote bag that said, Edinburgh. Honest to goodness, and a 12-year-old boy trailing behind her with the spiritual vitality of someone being slowly composted. Her husband, I guessed. Tina was the man 10 feet to her left, taking a photograph of the photograph she was taking. They were, in the calculus of my day, a Category 1. No threat. Maximum nuisance probability. I logged her. I moved on. Plus, I noticed her again at 11:39 because she had edged closer to the ceremonial sentry box than the cordoning rope strictly allowed. Not by much. Just that particular creep that tourists do. Millimeter by millimeter. And as though this restricted zone is something they can negotiate with through incremental good faith. The guard on post was Marsh. I knew Marsh the way you know anyone you've worked a perimeter with for 9 months. Not well, not personally, but in the particular language of posture and habit. I knew that he rolled his left shoulder twice before an extended static stand. I knew that he chewed the inside of his cheek when he was suppressing something, and I knew that his ceremonial bearing was technically flawless. Boots military mirrored, rifle angled to the millimeter, chin parallel to the ground. What I also knew, because Sergeant Okafor had said it bluntly during morning briefing, was that Marsh had come off a family emergency the previous night. Nobody elaborated. Nobody asked him to, and he'd shown up. He was standing, and that was the whole of what the regiment required. At 11:43, and the woman in the blue cagoule stepped over the rope. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. She stepped over it the way you step over a puddle. Automatic, habitual, mildly inconvenient, and moved to stand approximately 1 meter from Lance Corporal Marsh, raised her phone, and said in the particular volume people reserve for addressing foreigners and statues, You don't mind, do you, love? I put my pen down. But here is what the public believes about the ceremonial sentry. Position. That the guards are decorative. That the bearskin is performance. That, to be fair, the whole enterprise is cosplay in service of tourism revenue and heritage brand management. I've heard this argument made seriously by adults within earshot of the men who hold those posts. Here is what is also true. Marsh was armed. He was trained to a standard that would make most people's understanding of physical capability rearrange itself uncomfortably. And he was operating, at this precise moment, on 3 hours of sleep, a family emergency no one had named, and a blister that, I would find out later, had broken overnight, and was currently doing something impressionistic inside his left boot. I mean, he didn't move. She adjusted her angle. Her son had materialized from somewhere and was now standing to Marsh's left, the also photographing. The husband arrived, assessed the situation, and produced his own phone with the resigned efficiency of a man who has learned to document rather than question. "Smile," the woman said. The boy made a face at Marsh's profile, not unkind, just 12, just testing the boundaries of something he didn't have the vocabulary for. Marsh didn't move, but I was watching his jaw. I watch jaws. It is my one skill, possibly. The left side of Marsh's jaw was doing something deliberate, a held clench, released by degrees, reclenched. The kind of muscular conversation a person has with themselves when two separate things are happening simultaneously, and they're refusing to let either one show. The woman lowered her phone and looked at him with the specific curiosity of someone who has just noticed that the exhibit might be awake. She said, "Does it hurt? Standing like that all day?" And then, because the universe has a particular sense of what constitutes appropriate timing, her son, without warning, without malice, with the full psychic energy of a bored child who wants to go back to the hotel, reached out and poked Marsh's arm. One finger, tunic fabric, contact, which the boy grinned. Marsh's head turned. Not the full parade ground snap, nothing that. Sudden, nothing that performed. Just a degree or two of rotation. Enough. Oh, his eyes moved to the boy's face with the quality of attention you give something you're actively deciding not to react to. I was already moving, not running. Running creates panic. Panic creates crowd response. Crowd response creates the kind of report I'd be filling out until Christmas. I moved, in my opinion, at the pace of a man who has somewhere specific to be. Which is technically true, because the somewhere specific was directly between that family and whatever was about to happen next. I got there in 6 seconds, and I said, and I'm not proud of how bureaucratic this sounds in retrospect, "Madam, I'm going to need you to return behind the barrier, please." She looked at me. She looked at Marsh, and she looked at her son with the expression of a woman running a rapid cost-benefit analysis on the concept of public embarrassment. Then she looked back at Marsh, and Marsh, who hadn't spoken, hadn't moved beyond that small degree of rotation, who was technically still at post, or technically still within the parameters of ceremonial discipline, said 2 words. Quietly. The way you say something you've been holding in your chest for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Step back. Not a command, not a shout. Not the scripted, I mean. Warning I'd been trained to deliver, and he'd been trained to escalate to. Just 2 words with the entire weight of a human being behind them. TBH, the boy stepped back. The woman stepped back. The husband, now who hadn't fully processed what was happening, but had an excellent instinct for self-preservation, stepped back also. I stood between them and Marsh and felt the particular silence that happens when something that was about to become an incident decides, at the last possible second, not to. I didn't look at Marsh's face. I didn't need to. I already knew what was written there. The family left. I watched them go. Edinburgh tote bag, composite family, 12-year-old boy already reviewing. The photograph on the phone he'd apparently had in his other hand the entire time. They merged back into the general tourist organism, which swallowed them with total indifference, and within 40 seconds, they were indistinguishable from the crowd. I stood where I was for a moment longer than was strictly professional. The thing about an incident that doesn't become an incident is that there's no procedure for it. Nothing to log except my own particular brand of ambient dread. I clicked my pen 3 times. Click, 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 a habit I've had since training and can't stop, and walked back toward my post. I didn't, to be fair, speak to Marsh. Protocol doesn't require it, which in fact, protocol frowns on unnecessary contact during a sentry stand. Distraction is distraction, regardless of its source. I, to be fair, went back to my traffic form and wrote nothing for 4 minutes, which isn't what the form is for. What I was actually doing was thinking about those 2 words. Step back. In my 11 months on Outer Perimeter, I've witnessed 9 formal vocal warnings delivered by ceremonial guards to members of the public. 7 were the scripted escalation, the boom, the stamp, the words delivered with such mechanical force that tourists scramble backward like something's on fire. I think effective, which rehearsed. Impersonal. Marsh's 2 words were none of those things. I've been trying since October, and to describe what they were instead. The closest I've managed is this. It was the sound of someone drawing a line that has always existed, but that they've previously allowed other people to pretend isn't there. Not anger, not authority. Something that lives behind both of those things, quieter and considerably harder to dismiss. The boy had felt it. Plus, I'd seen it in his face. Not fear, nothing that clean, but the particular recalibration of a person who has just understood that they've misjudged something about the nature of the thing in front of them. At 1400, Marsh came off post. Plus, the rotation is 2 hours, 40 minutes on, 20 off. Repeat until your legs make their own separate peace with the situation. I was still on traffic count. I watched him march to the relief point. Heard the handover, watched his posture release by a single degree when he moved out of ceremony and into corridor. That 1 degree is what I can't stop thinking about. From, the outside, the bearskin, the tunic, the rifle angled to the millimeter, it looks like armor. It isn't armor. It is a set of requirements, and the difference between armor and requirements is that armor protects you. Requirements simply demand that you stand inside them regardless of what is happening to your body, your mind, your heel, your chest. Marsh had stood inside his requirements for 2 hours. He'd done it on 3 hours sleep. He'd done it with a family emergency that no one in the regiment had named, because naming it would have made it an argument about whether he should be there at all. And Marsh, from everything I'd observed in 9 months, would have found that argument more costly than the standing. I know this character type. I'm, in certain lights, this character type. And the people who show up. Not because showing up is easy. Not because they've calculated that the ritual is worth it. But because the ritual is the one thing between them and everything they can't manage right now. And so they choose the ritual, and they stand inside it. And they let it hold them in place until they can hold themselves. I caught up with him in the break room at 1420. I shouldn't have. But I'd a question, and I'm constitutionally incapable of leaving questions unasked, which is either why I'm good at this job or why I'll never be promoted past it, depending on who you ask. He was sitting, with his boots off. The left sock had a rust-colored blot the size of a 2-pound coin near the heel. He was eating a tracker bar, chocolate chip, with the focused economy of a man consuming calories rather than food. The bearskin was on the table beside him like something sleeping. I said, 2 words. He looked up. Plus, no, that's all you gave them, I said. For what it's worth, 2 words. Could have gone a, completely different way. Marsh chewed, swallowed, looked at the tracker bar. He said, it went the right way. You don't know that. The boy could have. He didn't. I clicked my pen. Click. Click. He watched my hand with the expression of someone who has clocked this habit before and made a private judgment about it. Sarge would have had you for that, I said. Unscripted verbal contact. Or there's actually a form. There's always a form. He pulled the sock off, examined his heel with the detached clinical interest of a man who has made a separate treaty with pain. Not denial, not stoicism, just a kind of acknowledgement and continuing. It was bad. I've a weak stomach for certain things, and a heel like that is one of them. I looked at the wall. Why didn't you use the full warning? I asked. You're authorized. You had grounds. She was over the line. But the kid made physical contact. Because the warning would have been for them, Marsh said. I turned back. He was putting the sock back on. Plus, he said it with the same quality he'd used on the kid. Not performed, not delivered, just placed there in the air between us like something he'd already decided about. The 2 words were for me. I didn't have anything to put after that. I clicked my pen once more, which in retrospect was not helpful, and sat down across from him and said nothing for a while. The bearskin sat between us on the table. Up close, in my opinion, it smelled of dust and lanolin and some particular institutional cleaner that I associate with every government building I've ever been inside. It smelled of the job. It smelled of the weight of the job. Outside, I could hear the crowd. 12,000 people a day walk past those gates. 12,000 people who see the performance and see nothing behind it. Who want to poke the exhibit and check if it's real. It's real. That's the thing. It's so real it bleeds into a sock and eats a tracker bar and says 2 words to save itself from the thing it can't say anything about at all. I wrote like nothing in my log that night. Some things shouldn't be data. 3 days later, she came back. I nearly missed her. The cagoule was green this time. A considered swap, I thought. Or possibly just the cagoule she'd packed for Wednesday. The for what it's worth. Edinburgh tote bag was the same. Sort of. The husband was absent. The boy was absent. She was alone, sort of, which changed the geometry of the thing entirely. I noticed her at 10:17. She, to be fair, stood at the rope for a long time. Not creeping. Basically, not photographing. Just standing, looking at the sentry box with the specific quality of attention that people give to things they've been thinking about and are not sure they've thought about correctly. The guard on post was not Marsh. Of course it wasn't Marsh. Marsh was on a different rotation, inner east, which I knew because I'd checked that morning for reasons I declined to interrogate too closely. The guard on post was Private Chung, 22, 9 weeks on ceremonial, excellent technical bearing, and the nervous energy of someone who hasn't yet learned that most of the threats aren't the ones you're trained for. The woman in the green cagoule stood at the rope, so she didn't cross it. I watched her for 4 minutes, long enough to establish this wasn't indecision, wasn't working up to something. She was just there, present on the right side of the barrier for the first time, looking at the post with an expression I couldn't categorize from my angle and eventually had to walk closer to understand. It took me until I was 15 feet away. She was looking basically at Chung, The way you look at something once you understand what it costs. Not to be fair, with guilt. Guilt is too self-centered an emotion for what I saw on her face. Something more uncomfortable than guilt. Something for what it's worth, that lives in the space between I didn't know and I should have. I've thought a lot about what Marsh said in the break room. The 2 words were for me. What I guess, think he meant. And I want to be clear that I'm speculating, that Marsh and I aren't friends in any meaningful sense, or that I'm a man who logs foot traffic and drinks boot polish coffee and probably makes incorrect inferences about people for a living. What I think he meant is this. There is a point in a long stand, a long day, a long year, where the thing that keeps you in place isn't the ceremony. The ceremony is the scaffold, which what it holds up is the decision you remake, every hour, every rotation, on to remain inside your requirements, instead of dissolving into whatever is happening to you below the surface. His family emergency. I still don't know what it was. I didn't ask and won't. But I know what it had been doing to him all morning, the way I know what weather is doing to a building. Not through the structure itself, but through the small distortions it creates. The held jaw, the rolled shoulder, the rust-colored blot expanding silently against wool. When the boy touched him, and something in the architecture shifted, the full protocol, I guess, warning would have been the ceremony speaking. Loud, scripted, impersonal. Performed at the crowd, not for any individual person. 2 words, quiet, with his whole self behind them. That was Marsh speaking. That was Marsh drawing the line not between himself and the tourist, but between himself and the thing that had been eating at him since 0430, and a 2-word text from someone who used to know him. He chose himself. I'm in that moment. Inside the ceremony. Pretty much without breaking it. Plus without anyone except me noticing, and I only noticed because I watched Jaws for a living. Like, she moved at 10:31. Not toward the post. Along the barrier. Sideways. Slow. Toward the crowd of other tourists. The ordinary dispersal of a person who has finished doing something private in a public place. I tracked her automatically, the habit of logging overriding any actual decision to pay attention. She stopped once. I don't, for what it's worth, know what made her stop. A sound, maybe? The crowd does things, shifts and breathes, produces sudden acoustic gaps that the city pours into. Or maybe nothing made her stop. Maybe she just stopped. She looked back at Chung on post. Chung, who was standing with technical correctness and 9 weeks of experience, and no idea he was being looked at by someone who'd had a small, private education 3 days prior. She didn't say anything. Sort of, she just looked. The way you look at something that you've reclassified. Then she went. That afternoon, I wrote 6 words in my incident log under the entry for Tuesday, October, 11:43. The 6 words I'd declined to write on the day. I'm not going to tell you what they were. What I'll tell you is that the log is a document of incidents, and an incident is legally defined within the regiment's operating procedures as any event that disrupts the security or ceremonial function of the palace perimeter. What happened on Tuesday didn't disrupt anything. What you know did was quieter than that, and considerably more durable. I saw Marsh again at the end of October. Different context. I was crossing the inner courtyard. He was coming the other way. Both of us in administrative kit, off ceremony. He looked better. Slept, I thought, and the rolling shoulder was less pronounced. He had TBH, a coffee cup, and he was drinking from it while walking, which isn't protocol, but is very human. We passed each other. He didn't say anything. Kind of. I didn't say anything. We aren't friends. But he met my eyes for a half second as we passed. And there was something in that half-second. Not acknowledgement exactly, not the kind you perform, just a flicker of something shared. The specific understanding of two people who were both in a room when something real happened, and both declined to pretend otherwise. I kept walking. He kept walking, and I got to the end of the courtyard and clicked my pen. Click, 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 and stood there for a moment with the October sky doing something complicated above the palace. 12,000 people like a day. None of them will know what the line costs to hold. Most of them won't care. But somewhere in a green cagoule on a Wednesday morning, one of them stood at the rope and looked at a young soldier standing perfectly still in the cold, and understood, without anyone explaining it to her, without a sign or a pamphlet or an apology, understood that the stillness wasn't absence. It was the whole of a person, held in place, by choice, every single second.